It started out as every relationship does, full of hope, laughter, and dreams. Leela and I met at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was someone special. 2 years later, we were living together, making plans for a future that felt solid, like the ground beneath our feet. But lately, that ground has been shaking, and the cracks that have been forming are getting harder to ignore. The arguments started small. A disagreement here, a misunderstanding there. At first, I brushed it off as part of the natural ebb and flow of any relationship. But as time went on, the frequency of our quarrels increased. Little things turned into big things, and the love that used to flow between us so easily now felt distant, like it was coming through a filter. It's hard to pinpoint when the distance began, but I felt it growing day by day. Leela started working late more often. At first, it was the occasional evening here and there, but then it became almost every other night. She always had a reason. There's a deadline I need to hit, or I'm meeting a colleague to go over some data. Reasonable explanations, but something about the way she'd leave hurried, like she couldn't wait to be anywhere but here, started to bother me. I'd ask her if everything was okay, and she'd brush me off, saying it was just work stress. But I could feel the wall between us growing higher. It didn't help that our arguments often ended in silence. She would storm out, claiming she needed space, and I'd sit in the quiet, feeling like I was slowly being pushed out of my own life. I'd try to bridge the gap, suggest ways we could spend more time together, but every suggestion was met with excuses. Maybe next week, Ethan. I'm just so tired. Always too tired. Always too busy. Last night was one of those nights. We had argued over something ridiculous. I think it was about laundry, or maybe dinner. I can't even remember anymore. What I do remember is how cold her eyes were when she walked out the door, claiming she had to meet someone from work. She left without looking back, and I was left sitting on the couch, staring at the space where she used to be. A part of me wanted to follow her, demand an answer for why she was always running away from our problems. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, the weight of my suspicions settling over me like a heavy blanket. Was she really going to work? Or was it something else, something worse? I shook the thought from my head, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I was just imagining things. But it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong. It wasn't just the late nights. It was everything: her distance, her lack of interest in the things we used to enjoy together. We used to spend hours talking about our future, making plans for trips we'd take, for the house we'd one day build. But now, even the simplest conversations felt forced, as if she was just going through the motions. I told myself I needed to be patient, that relationships go through rough patches, and that this was just one of those times. But how long does a rough patch last? A few weeks? A few months? It had been almost a year since I felt like we were truly happy together. I kept trying to hold on, hoping that the Leela I fell in love with would come back to me. But with each passing day, it felt like I was holding on to a ghost. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought of her being with someone else had crossed my mind more than once. It seemed ridiculous. I knew her, or at least I thought I did. Leela wasn't the type of person to lie, to betray someone who cared about her. But people change, don't they? And sometimes, they change into someone you no longer recognize. The house felt too quiet without her in it, so I grabbed my jacket and decided to take a walk. I needed air, needed space to clear my head. As I stepped outside, the night was cold, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I started walking, not really caring where I was going, just needing to move. My mind kept replaying our last argument, her cold expression, the way she slammed the door behind her. For a moment, I considered calling her, asking where she really was. But what good would that do? If she was lying, she wouldn't tell me the truth, and if she wasn't, well, then I'd just be the paranoid boyfriend who couldn't trust his own partner. I found myself standing at the edge of the park near our house. It used to be a place we came to relax, to escape the stress of work and life. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything we were losing. I sat down on one of the benches and stared out into the dark, feeling more alone than I had in a long time. The question that had been gnawing at the back of my mind finally forced its way to the front. Was Leela still in love with me? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The next morning, The unease from last night lingered, a dull ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. Leela had come home late, slipping into bed without a word. I pretended to be asleep, not wanting to confront her. I knew that if I asked where she had been, she'd have another perfectly reasonable excuse, and I wasn't ready to hear it. As I got ready for work, I checked my phone, hoping for some distraction from the thoughts circling my mind. That's when I saw the message from Dylan, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. "Hey man, are you okay?" I stared at the message, confused. Why would he be asking that out of nowhere? I replied, asking him what he meant. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. His response made my heart drop. "I was at a party last night. I saw Leela with someone. I didn't know if I should tell you, but it didn't look good, Ethan. There's something you should see." A video file popped up on my screen, and for a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down, bracing myself for whatever was coming. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend that nothing was wrong, that Dylan was mistaken. But I had to know. I clicked play. The shaky phone footage showed a backyard patio, the kind of upscale gathering spot we used to hang out at before everything started falling apart. At first, it was just the sounds of distant conversation and laughter, and then the camera panned to a familiar face, Leela. She was standing close to a man, her body language comfortable, intimate. I recognized him immediately, Jason, her old university friend. My chest tightened as I watched the two of them, their heads tilted toward each other, laughing at something I couldn't hear. And then, in one fluid motion, they leaned in, and their lips met. My breath caught in my throat as I paused the video, staring at the frozen image of them kissing. It felt like a punch to the gut. This was it. The confirmation I had dreaded, but expected all along. Leela had been lying to me, and I had the proof in my hands. I dropped my phone on the table, leaning back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. She told me she was going to her friend's house last night, something about work-related plans. But there she was, kissing Jason at a party, like she didn't have a care in the world. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me while I sat at home, questioning my own sanity? The anger came next, hot and sharp. I wanted to storm into the bedroom, wake her up, and demand answers. But what good would that do? She'd probably deny it, or come up with some excuse. I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet, not until I had more answers. Instead, I replied to Dylan, thanking him for telling me. He seemed apologetic, explaining that he wasn't sure if he should have said anything but thought I deserved to know. He was right, I did. But it didn't make the pain any less. I spent the rest of the day at work in a daze. My mind kept replaying the video. That kiss seared into my memory. It felt surreal, like it couldn't possibly be happening to me. This was Leela, my Leela, the woman I had planned my future with, the woman who had once loved me as deeply as I loved her. How had we gotten here? How had she drifted so far away from me without me even noticing? That night, I sat across from her at the dinner table, pretending everything was normal, when inside I was boiling. She looked tired, stressed even, and I wondered how much of that was guilt. Did she feel anything about what she was doing? Or had she convinced herself that it wasn't wrong, that I didn't deserve to know? As I watched her, I realized that I couldn't confront her yet. Not like this. I needed more. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went, how long she had been seeing Jason behind my back. Was it just him? Or were there others? I wasn't sure if I could handle the answer, but I had to know. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention. I checked her phone when she wasn't around, but it was clean, no messages from Jason, no incriminating texts. Either she was being careful, or she had a way of hiding it. I began tracking her late-night outings, watching for any more signs of her deceit. Each time she left the house, I felt my heart harden a little more. The Leela I had once known seemed like a stranger now, someone who had perfected the art of lying without me even realizing it. How had I missed it for so long? And then, another message from Dylan confirmed what I had been dreading. I saw her with Jason again. This isn't the first time. My suspicions were now certainties. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It had been happening for a while, and I had been blind to it. The realization crushed me, but it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I had to act, but I had to be smart about it. I needed more than just one video. I needed the full truth. After Dylan's second message, I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I knew Leela had been lying to me for God knows how long, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen any longer. But confronting her head-on wouldn't get me what I needed. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I had to gather more evidence, enough to corner her with the undeniable truth. The first step was to find out how often they met. Leela's late-night work sessions had become more frequent lately, and now I was sure she wasn't going to the office. I began paying closer attention to the details, asking more questions about where she was going and who she was meeting. Her answers were vague, always something about a team meeting or last-minute deadlines. She'd gotten good at covering her tracks, but she hadn't counted on me watching her every move. That night, as she sat on the couch texting, I took a mental note of her expressions. She seemed a little too engaged, smiling at her phone more than usual. She claimed it was just work stuff, but I had a sinking feeling it was something else. As soon as she went to bed, I grabbed my laptop and started searching for ways to track her movements. I wasn't proud of it, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I installed a location tracking app on her phone, something that could run in the background without her noticing. It would give me a real-time update on where she went and when she went there. That was step one. Step two was setting up a way to monitor her messages. It wasn't easy, but after some digging, I found a cloning tool that would allow me to see everything she sent or received on her phone without her knowing. It was risky, but I had to know the truth. The next few days were a blur of waiting and watching. Every time she left the house, I tracked her location. Most of the time, it was the usual spots: work, the grocery store, her gym. But then, one evening, she went somewhere new. Her phone pinged at a small restaurant downtown, a place we used to go for date nights before everything started falling apart. My stomach churned as I watched the little on the map hover there for hours. That was the first red flag. I decided to drive by the restaurant to see for myself. I didn't expect to find anything. Maybe she really was just grabbing dinner after a long day. But when I pulled up and parked across the street, there she was, sitting at a table by the window. And across from her, unmistakably, was Jason. They weren't touching, not this time, but the way they leaned toward each other, the way she smiled at him. It was the same smile she used to give me when we first started dating. I felt sick, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I watched them for as long as I could stand it, then drove home, my mind racing. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about how easily she had been lying to my face, night after night. How many other nights had she done this? How long had I been the fool? The next morning, I checked the clone messages on her phone. As expected, there was nothing directly incriminating, just some vague texts to friends and the usual work-related chatter. But there were gaps, long stretches where I knew she had been texting, but the messages were missing. She was deleting them, probably right after she sent them. It was another layer of deceit, another reminder that she had been covering her tracks for a while. I needed more. I needed to see her with him, somewhere they wouldn't expect to be found. That's when I decided to follow her the next time she said she was going to work late. I didn't tell her I had plans, didn't give her any reason to suspect I was onto her. I just let her leave the house, and then I tailed her. It didn't take long for her to lead me straight to Jason. They met at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop this time. And from the way they greeted each other, quick glances around before sitting in the corner, whispering, I knew they were hiding something. I stayed outside, snapping photos from my car. I felt like some kind of detective, but it was the only way to get what I needed. After that, I started piecing things together. I gathered all the messages, the photos, the location data. I built a timeline of every time she had met with Jason, every lie she had told me about where she was. It was more than enough proof to confront her, but I wasn't ready yet. Something inside me wanted her to feel the weight of her deception before I dropped everything in front of her. At home, Leela acted like everything was normal. She was more affectionate than she had been in weeks, almost as if she sensed something had shifted, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time she touched me, I thought about Jason, about those secret meetings, and the lies that had piled up between us. I was ready for the confrontation, but not yet. First, I needed one more piece of evidence, something that would make sure she couldn't wriggle out of it. something that would make her realize just how much she had hurt me. It was the same week that I'd followed Leela to that coffee shop with Jason that something completely unexpected happened. I was at a work conference, trying to keep my mind off the mess that had become my life. Leela was supposed to be there with me, but as usual, she had made an excuse, claiming she couldn't leave town because of an urgent project. Part of me was relieved she hadn't come. I didn't know how I would handle pretending everything was normal in front of my colleagues. I was walking out of a session on product innovation, my head full of industry jargon I barely cared about, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Ethan? I turned around, and there she was, Haley. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her in years, not since we parted ways after college. We'd been inseparable back then, but life pulled us in different directions, and our relationship faded like so many youthful romances do. But standing there, in the middle of a conference center, it was like no time had passed at all. Haley, I said, my voice thick with disbelief. She smiled, and suddenly, it was like being transported back in time. We hugged, the embrace feeling both nostalgic and bittersweet. I had long buried the feelings I once had for her, convinced they were nothing more than the echoes of a time when life was simpler. But seeing her now, those feelings rushed back to the surface. We quickly fell into conversation, catching up on each other's lives. She told me about her work in marketing, how she had been traveling a lot lately, and how much she missed having real conversations with people from her past. I told her about my engineering job and the company I had co-founded, though I left out the part about my crumbling relationship with Leela. That was a conversation for another time if ever. After the session ended, we grabbed coffee, talking for what felt like hours. It was easy, comfortable, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't have to pretend or hide behind a wall of lies. With Haley, everything felt genuine, like it always had. We reminisced about old times, laughing about silly moments we shared during our college days. For a few hours, I was able to forget about Leela and everything that had been eating away at me. Then, out of nowhere, Haley brought up something that hit me like a punch to the gut. You still with that girl you were seeing after we split? Leela, right? I hesitated for a second, then nodded. Yeah, we've been together for a couple of years now. Haley raised an eyebrow, sensing something in my voice. But things aren't great, I admitted, the words coming out more easily than I expected. We're not in a good place right now. I wasn't sure why I was telling her this. Maybe it was because she had been such a big part of my life, or maybe it was because she was the first person in a long time I felt I could be honest with. Either way, the truth slipped out, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I think she's seeing someone else, I said quietly, looking down at my coffee. Actually, I know she is. Haley's expression softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything at that moment. Ethan, I'm so sorry, she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more without breaking down. The pain I'd been bottling up for weeks suddenly felt unbearable, but Haley's presence grounded me. It was like she had stepped back into my life at exactly the right moment, offering me a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. We continued talking, but the tone had shifted. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, a shared history that gave her insight into what I was going through. As we sat there, the old feelings I'd buried so long ago began to resurface. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something deeper, something real. I could feel the connection between us growing, just like it had all those years ago. After the conference ended for the day, we walked through the city, talking about anything and everything. Haley suggested grabbing dinner, and before I knew it, we were sitting in a cozy restaurant, sharing stories like old friends. But the tension between us was undeniable, and as the night went on, it became clear that this was more than just two old friends catching up. I felt guilty. Here I was, deep in the middle of Leela's betrayal, and yet I couldn't deny the feelings that were growing between Haley and me. It felt like a betrayal of my own, but at the same time, it felt like the most honest thing I'd experienced in months. By the end of the night, we were standing outside her hotel, the city lights casting a soft glow around us. There was a moment of silence, the kind of moment where everything hangs in the balance. I missed this, she said softly, her eyes searching mine. I missed us. I couldn't deny it. I had missed it too, missed the ease, the laughter, the connection. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Leela or Jason or the lies. I was just thinking about Haley and what we had shared. I missed it too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a long moment, the distance between us shrinking. I could feel the weight of what was happening, the shift in my feelings, the confusion of it all. But I also knew that whatever was between Haley and me wasn't something I could ignore. As I walked back to my hotel room that night, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: guilt, excitement, confusion. The betrayal I'd uncovered with Leela had pushed me into a place I never thought I'd be. And now, Haley was here, offering me a way out, a glimpse of something real amidst the chaos. But what did that mean for me? For Leela? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The path I had been walking was no longer clear, and everything was about to change. The more I thought about Leela's betrayal, the more it ate away at me. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, watching her lie to my face, pretending everything was normal while she met Jason behind my back. I couldn't shake the anger, the humiliation. I had trusted her, built a life with her, and she had thrown it all away for him. And now, after that unexpected reunion with Haley, something in me had shifted. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. That night, after my dinner with Haley, as I sat alone in my hotel room, a plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to confront Leela, not yet. No, I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal, just like I had. But instead of flying off the handle or giving her the satisfaction of an explosive argument, I would play it cool. I would bide my time and let her think she was in control, that her secret was still safe. But I had a secret of my own now. Haley and I had stayed in touch after the conference, texting each other every day, falling back into an easy rhythm that felt both comforting and exciting. The connection we had once shared was still there, stronger than ever, and with every conversation, I found myself drawn to her. I didn't set out to use her as a way to get back at Leela, but it was undeniable that part of me relished the idea. If Leela thought she could keep living this double life, then I would show her that two could play that game. I began spending more time with Haley, meeting her for lunch, going on long walks, and grabbing dinner whenever Leela had one of her late nights. Every time I saw Leela getting dressed up to meet Jason, I'd casually tell her I had plans too. She didn't ask many questions, assuming I was just catching up with old friends or taking on extra work. She had no idea that I was slowly slipping away from her, just as she had done to me. Haley, for her part, didn't ask too many questions about my relationship with Leela. She knew things were bad, but I didn't share the full extent of what was happening. It was easier that way, less messy. The time I spent with Haley felt like an escape from the chaos at home, a chance to feel wanted, valued, and cared for again. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. I was starting to care about her. And as the days passed, my feelings for Haley deepened. At home, things with Leela continued to unravel. We fought over the smallest things: dishes left in the sink, missed phone calls, and broken promises. She was distant, but I played along, acting like everything was fine. Each time we argued, I could see the frustration in her eyes, the guilt simmering beneath the surface, though she never admitted it. She didn't know that I was already 2 steps ahead of her, that I knew exactly what she was doing behind my back. The more I spent time with Haley, the less I cared about what Leela did. The anger and resentment that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of freedom. I was no longer tied to the lies and betrayals that had poisoned our relationship. I had my own life now, my own happiness, and Leela had no idea she was losing me. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Leela suggested that we take a trip together, a tropical getaway to reset our relationship, as she called it. She said that she wanted to work things out, that we needed time away from the stress of everyday life to reconnect. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After everything she had done, after all the lies, she still thought we could fix things with a vacation, but I played along. I told her it was a great idea, that maybe a trip would help us work through our issues. In reality, I had already decided to end things, but not before I got my revenge. I booked the trip, but what Leela didn't know was that Haley would be there too. It wasn't hard to arrange. Haley and I had talked about taking a vacation together, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Leela had no idea that our little tropical paradise would turn into her worst nightmare. When we arrived at the resort, Leela seemed hopeful. She smiled more, tried to make small talk, even suggested we go snorkeling together. But I could see through it. She was just trying to make herself feel better, trying to forget about what she had done with Jason. I played along, acting like I was still invested in fixing things, but inside, I was already miles away. Then, one evening, everything fell into place. Leela had gone to the spa, and I had arranged to meet Haley on the beach. We were walking along the shoreline, laughing and holding hands, when Leela appeared in the distance. At first, she didn't notice us, but then I saw her freeze. Her eyes widened as she spotted us together, her face a mix of confusion and fury. I watched as she marched over, her voice sharp and accusing, but I didn't react. She demanded to know what was going on, why Haley was there, why we were together. I simply smiled, letting the truth hang in the air. For once, she was the one left speechless, her lies unraveling before her eyes. This was my moment of revenge, and it was just beginning. Leela stormed toward us, her face a mix of shock and anger. I had seen her angry before during our countless arguments, but this was different. This was raw, desperate. She looked at Haley, then back at me, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time, I wasn't the one caught off guard. I was calm, almost detached, as if I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. In a way, I had. What the hell is going on, Ethan? Leela's voice was sharp, demanding answers she wasn't ready to hear. I turned to Haley, giving her a small nod, and she quietly excused herself. There was no need for her to be part of this confrontation. This was between me and Leela. As Haley walked away, I saw Leela's eyes follow her, disbelief written all over her face. Who is she? Why is she here? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to mask it with anger. I crossed my arms, standing firm. Her name is Haley, and she's here because I invited her. Leela blinked, momentarily stunned. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For once, she wasn't in control. I had turned the tables, and she didn't know how to handle it. You invited her? She repeated, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it less real. What is this? Some kind of sick joke? We came here to fix things, Ethan. I thought this trip was supposed to be about us. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. Us? Really, Leela? You thought a vacation would magically fix everything? After everything you've been doing behind my back? My voice hardened, the anger I'd been holding back bubbling to the surface. Do you honestly think I didn't know about Jason? Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form a response. Jason? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Leela. I snapped, my patience wearing thin. I know about everything. The late-night meetings, the lies, the sneaking around. You've been seeing him for months. And I have proof. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She tried to recover, her voice wavering as she spoke. Ethan, it's not what you think. Don't. I cut her off, stepping closer. Don't you dare try to lie to me again. I've seen the messages, the photos. I know exactly what's been going on between you and Jason. Leela's hands shook as she ran them through her hair, her voice cracking as she tried to explain herself. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. Things between us have been so bad, and I didn't know how to fix it. Her voice broke, and she looked at me with pleading eyes. But that's why we're here, Ethan. I wanted to fix things between us. I never meant for it to go this far. I felt a cold wave of bitterness wash over me as I listened to her excuses. I had imagined this moment so many times, wondering how I would feel when she finally admitted to what she had done. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, but all I felt was emptiness. Her words meant nothing. They couldn't undo the months of deceit. You didn't mean for it to go this far? I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. Leela, you didn't just trip and fall into his arms. You made a choice. Over and over again. You chose to betray me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the nights I spent waiting for her, wondering where she was, thinking I was losing my mind. I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the cold indifference she had shown me for months, and the sympathy I might have felt disappeared. I was lost, she whispered, wiping her eyes. Ethan, I was lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back. Jason, he was just a distraction. He didn't mean anything. I was going to end it, I swear. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. It's funny, isn't it? How these things are always about to end when you get caught. She flinched at my words, her tears falling faster now. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, but I never stopped loving you. I didn't know how to fix us. I stood there, watching her break down, but her words barely touched me anymore. I had heard them all before: the apologies, the excuses. They didn't matter now. You didn't stop loving me? I repeated, shaking my head. Leela, you don't hurt the people you love. You used me. You used my trust, and then you threw it away like it meant nothing. She took a step closer, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Ethan, she begged, her voice desperate. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll cut Jason out of my life. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had spent so much time trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to hold on to a relationship that was already dead. But now, standing on this beach with Leela in front of me, I realized I didn't want to fix things. I didn't want to go back to the way things were. Leela, I said softly, my voice steady. It's over. Her face crumpled, and she shook her head in disbelief. No, Ethan, please. Don't say that. We can fix this. I love you. I don't believe that anymore, I said, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. I've already moved on. I didn't plan for this to happen, but Haley, she reminded me of what it feels like to be with someone who actually cares. Someone who doesn't lie, or cheat, or destroy everything we've built. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she sank to her knees in the sand, sobbing. Please, Ethan, please don't leave me. I'll change. I'll do anything. But her words, her tears, didn't sway me anymore. I had finally reached the point where her betrayal no longer had power over me. I'm sorry, Leela, I said, stepping back. But you lost me the day you chose him. I turned and walked away, leaving her behind in the sand, her sobs fading into the sound of the waves. As I walked away from Leela on that beach, her sobs gradually drowned out by the sound of the crashing waves, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. It was as though I had been carrying the weight of her betrayal for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. But now, in this moment, I finally felt it: a lightness, a release from the anger, the hurt, and the lies. I didn't look back. There was no need to. I had made my decision, and there was nothing left to salvage. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tethered to the broken pieces of a relationship that had been crumbling for months. I was free. Haley was waiting for me at the hotel. I had told her I needed to handle things with Leela alone, and she respected that. She was always like that: calm, understanding, never pushing me to do anything I wasn't ready for. That's what I had always admired about her. In a world full of chaos and deceit, Haley was steady, a reminder of what love could be if it was real. As I entered the hotel lobby, my mind raced back to everything that had brought me to this point. The lies, the nights spent wondering where Leela was, the videos of her with Jason, the cold realization that the woman I loved had turned into someone I didn't recognize. I had spent so long trying to understand why she did what she did, trying to figure out if I had done something wrong, but now, I understood something vital. It wasn't about me. Leela's choices were hers, and no matter how much I loved her or tried to fix things, I couldn't control the decisions she made. She had chosen to betray me, and that wasn't something I could change. But I could choose to walk away, to start over, and that's exactly what I was doing now. Haley was sitting at a small table near the bar, her eyes scanning the room nervously. When she saw me, her face softened, and she stood up, waiting for me to come to her. I could tell she had been worried about how things would play out with Leela. She didn't say it, but I knew she feared I might still have feelings for my wife, that I might turn back at the last moment and try to save something that was beyond saving. But as I walked over to her, I smiled, and Haley immediately knew. She didn't need to ask how it went. My expression said it all. "It's over," I said quietly, sliding into the seat next to her. Haley reached out and placed her hand over mine, her touch warm and comforting. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment, trying to sort through the myriad of emotions swirling inside me. There was a part of me that still felt the sting of betrayal, the loss of the future I had once imagined with Leela. But overwhelmingly, I felt a sense of relief, like I had finally shed a skin that no longer fit. "I feel free," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. Haley smiled softly. "Good. You deserve that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our drinks as the night settled around us. The tropical air was warm, the scent of salt water drifting in through the open windows. It was peaceful, almost surreal, how quickly my life had changed in the span of a few days. I had gone from a man trapped in a web of lies to someone standing on the edge of a new beginning, and it all felt right. The next few days were a blur of sunlight, laughter, and easy conversation. Haley and I spent our time exploring the island, hiking along coastal cliffs, lounging on the beach, and talking about everything and nothing. It felt natural, like we had slipped back into the rhythm of our old selves, but with the added depth of two people who had lived, who had been hurt, and who now understood what really mattered. I had always cared about Haley, but something had shifted between us now. It wasn't just about rekindling an old flame, it was about building something new, something that was honest and real. There was no pretense, no lies between us, and after everything I had been through with Leela, that kind of honesty felt like a gift. On the last night of our trip, as we sat on the balcony of our hotel room, watching the sun set over the ocean, Haley turned to me with a look of quiet determination. "Ethan," she said softly, "what happens next?" I glanced at her, feeling a small knot form in my chest. It was a good question, one I had been avoiding. What had happened next? We had shared this amazing time together, this escape from reality, but what would happen when we went back to the real world? Back to jobs, responsibilities, and the mess of my separation from Leela? "I don't know," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "I mean, I know I want to be with you, Haley. That's the only thing I'm sure of." Her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I want that too. But are you ready? I don't want to rush you into anything." I appreciated her caution, her understanding. Haley had always been the kind of person who thought things through, who didn't jump into anything without being sure. And as much as I wanted to dive into this new relationship with her, I knew I had to tread carefully. "I think I am," I said after a moment of reflection. "I've been through hell these last few months, and I won't lie, it's going to take time to process everything. But I'm not holding on to the past anymore. Leela and we're done, and I want to move forward with you." Haley smiled, her eyes shining with quiet happiness. "Then let's take it one step at a time. No rush. Just us." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. That was the thing about Haley, she never pressured me, never made me feel like I had to be something I wasn't. She was patient, kind, and after everything I had been through, that was exactly what I needed. As we sat there, watching the last rays of the sun disappear below the horizon, I realized that this was the start of something new, something good. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I had been through betrayal, pain, and heartbreak, but now I was stepping into a new chapter, one where I could finally be happy. And this time, I wasn't looking back.